Out of all the legendary directors covered on this channel, no one carries more mythology or obsessive precision than good old Stanley Kubrick, a filmmaker who terrified studios, exhausted actors, and literally borrowed camera lenses from NASA just to shoot candlelights in the 70s. In this video, we're breaking down every Stanley Kubrick film, going through the budgets, the box office revenue, and the production backstories to see if the financial success of his films matched his legendary, infamous visual ambition. Before Kubrick ever directed a Hollywood movie, he honed his visual craft as a photographer at Look magazine. That discipline would later define his filmmaking, but at the time, it remained untested. Rather than wait for an opportunity, Kubrick created his own. His first feature, Fear and Desire, was built entirely outside the studio system. Financed through personal connections, the movie had a budget of roughly $30,000.
Don't be afraid. We're not going to hurt you. She's quite nice. Don't you think so, boys?
Fear and Desire never had a proper theatrical release. Distributors didn't know what to do with it. For decades, it was practically impossible to see because Kubrick himself suppressed it. He bought up existing prints and refused to let them be shown. It wasn't until after his death that the film became legally available. Critically, the film was barely reviewed at the time, but decades later, after Kubrick became a legend, critics went back and watched it out of curiosity, giving it a 70% approval score. The critics were extremely forgiving, but the audience were a bit more honest. The acting and composition was not as tight as they would be in his later films. After the commercial non-event of Fear and Desire, Kubrick knew he couldn't scrape together another random micro-budget war film on his own, but he also refused to surrender control, so he turned to a genre that had always been cheap to produce, but very hard to master.
All my life, I've always spoiled the things that meant the most to me. All my life.
I really don't care. I just want you to get out of here.
Gloria, please, can't you understand? If only you could know how low and worthless I feel.
I didn't even know you had any feelings.
Oh, you foolish girl. I'm mad about you.
After Fear and Desire went nowhere financially, Kubrick found a producer, Maurice Bousel, a friend from the Bronx who had access to some family money. Together, they raised about $75,000, nearly double the budget of his first film, but still laughably small by Hollywood standards. Kubrick wrote the script himself in a few weeks, borrowing heavily from the noir conventions he loved. Killer's Kiss follows Davy Gordon, a struggling boxer in New York City nearing the end of his career, as he becomes entangled with a girl named Gloria, a dance hall girl being controlled by a violent nightclub owner. This movie covers themes of loneliness, failure, and the desperate scramble for dignity in a city that doesn't care. And this would become a recurring Kubrick obsession, characters trapped not by walls but by their own limitations. Financially, Killer's Kiss performed slightly better than Fear and Desire, but it still didn't break through. With United Artists handling distribution, the film saw a limited release, earning an estimated $200,000 worldwide. After expenses, Kubrick and his partner likely just recouped their $75,000 budget, maybe turning a small profit, but nothing substantial. This was cinema before the blockbuster, before giant opening weekends and franchise obligations. After Killer's Kiss, Kubrick had two indie features under his belt, a growing reputation as a talented young cinematographer, and exactly zero financial security. He needed a real hit, so a studio could trust him with some real money. So instead of another experiment, Kubrick tightened everything and set out to make something much more precise. The Killing follows a meticulous ex-convict named Johnny Clay, played by Sterling Hayden, who recruits a team of small-time criminals to execute a daring racetrack robbery. The plan is intricately designed and synchronized down to the minute, but as the heist unfolds, the cracks in each man's personal life begin pulling at the seams. Instead of a linear narrative, The Killing uses a non-linear structure, revisiting the same moments from different perspectives and time-lapses, with information revealed to the audience piece by piece. This was extremely uncommon at the time, and it forced the audience to actively piece together the story and solve the heist along with the characters. United Artists agreed to back the movie with a budget of $320,000, which was real money compared to Kubrick's previous efforts, but still deeply modest. Kubrick co-wrote the screenplay with crime writer Jim Thompson, who had written classics like The Grifters.
All right, everybody up.
What is this?
It'll be a massacre if you don't keep those mitts up. Now, where's Johnny? What time's he due? Look, I've been sitting out in that car since 4 o'clock listening to that radio. I heard some pretty interesting things.
Financially, The Killing was Kubrick's first real success, grossing a reported $1.3 million worldwide and making United Artists a healthy profit. Kubrick had sold the rights to the movie for a flat fee of $20,000, with no profit participation, which was pretty standard for a young director at the time. Still, the movie's theatrical success opened doors and also began the long-tail pattern that would define much of Kubrick's catalogue. The Killing holds a remarkable 96% critic score, one of the highest-rated films in Kubrick's entire catalogue. Its influence on crime cinema is enormous. Quentin Tarantino has cited it as a direct influence on the structure of Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction.
People took a sentence that I said once and said that I was like, I ripped off The Killing, or a paraphrase remake of The Killing. I was making a heist film, and I would say, this is my The Killing.
The Killing's critical reception gave Kubrick the credibility to attract a major star for his next project, and together they made the film that would first show the world what Kubrick was truly capable of. Paths of Glory is one of the most powerful anti-war films ever made. Set during World War I, the story follows Colonel Dax, played by Kirk Douglas, a French officer who is ordered to lead his men on a suicidal assault against a near-impregnable German position. When the attack inevitably fails, the commanding generals, desperate to deflect blame for their own cowardice and incompetence, decide to court-martial 3 ordinary soldiers for cowardice. The film ends with an execution that is among the most devastating sequences in cinema history. Kirk Douglas had been trying to get Humphrey Cobb's novel made into a film for years. The story was based on a real incident during World War I, and every studio he approached passed. The story was too dark, too anti-military, too likely to upset the French government. Douglas eventually brought it to Kubrick, who was immediately and viscerally drawn to it. The budget was set for $900,000, a meaningful step up from The Killing, and enough to produce something with genuine scale. United Artists agreed to fund it partly on the strength of Douglas's star power, though the studio was under no illusions that this was a commercial project. Filming took place in Munich, Germany, using the German countryside to stand in for northern France. The production team built an elaborate trench system for the battle sequences. Kubrick spent enormous energy planning the logistics of the tracking shots, which required specialized camera mounts and careful choreography with dozens of extras. Paths of Glory earned $1.2 million at the box office, a huge financial disappointment, but those numbers significantly understate the film's commercial damage, because the film was banned in France for nearly 2 decades over its unflattering portrait of the French military high command. It was also restricted or banned outright in several other countries, including Switzerland and parts of the Commonwealth, which cut off large portions of its potential international audience entirely. For Kubrick, the numbers and reception was almost beside the point. What the film gave him was a reputation. The word was spreading that this was a director capable of something exceptional. After Paths of Glory, Kubrick was approached by Kirk Douglas once again, but this time for something far bigger, the most expensive Hollywood production ever attempted, and almost no creative control. Spartacus follows the historical slave rebellion of 73 BC, led by the Thracian gladiator Spartacus, against the Roman Republic. Kirk Douglas plays the leading role, a man of iron will who rises from a slave to revolutionary leader, building an army against the most powerful military force on Earth. Spartacus was the most expensive film ever made in America at the time of its production. The budget was approximately $12 million, a staggering sum for that time period, and one that carried an almost surreal weight. The production budget exceeded the total worth of Universal Studios itself, which was sold to MCA for $11 million during filming. The movie cost more than the studio making it was worth. This became one of the most chaotic productions of Kubrick's career. The original director, Anthony Mann, was fired after just a week, forcing Kirk Douglas to find a replacement quickly. Having worked with Stanley Kubrick on Paths of Glory, Douglas brought him in, despite knowing he could be difficult. Kubrick was hesitant. He didn't like stepping into another director's vision, but the offer, a reported $150,000, which was more than the entire budget of his previous movie, was way too big to ignore. Kubrick pushed to rewrite the script, while Douglas insisted on sticking to Dalton Trumbo's screenplay. Kubrick wanted it shot in black and white, but the studio demanded Technicolor. Regardless, they settled for a compromise, and the film was finally released.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus. I'm Spartacus.
At the box office, Spartacus grossed $60 million worldwide, making it one of the highest-grossing films of 1960. Adjusted for inflation, Spartacus would have grossed over $600 million today. By any reasonable financial measure, Spartacus was a major commercial triumph for the studio. For Kubrick personally, it was more complicated. His name was now attached to a massive hit, but it still wasn't his film or vision. The lesson he took from Spartacus was critical to the rest of his career. He would never again work without full creative control, regardless of the budget or the star power attached. Critically, Spartacus was also a major triumph, holding a 93% approval score, and also winning 4 Academy Awards including Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, Best Art Direction, and Best Supporting Actor. It remains one of the definitive Hollywood epics of its era, and helped establish a template that films like Gladiator would revisit 40 years later. After Spartacus, Kubrick moved to England and spent the rest of his career operating from there. His first project as a fully independent creative force in England was a dark, controversial adaptation of one of the most scandalous novels of the 20th century. Based on Vladimir Nabokov's novel, Lolita follows Humbert, a refined European academic who becomes obsessed with a young American girl named Dolores Hayes, whom he privately calls Lolita. He insinuates himself into her life by marrying her vulgar, love-struck mother. And when the mother dies, he begins a deeply disturbing relationship with the child. The movie is less about the taboo content of the novel and more about the architecture of self-deception, but still, the toned-down version is still deeply unsettling. Nabokov himself was hired to write the screenplay and produced a massive, essentially unfilmable draft running nearly 400 pages. Kubrick used it as source material, but rewrote it almost entirely, keeping some of Nabokov's dialogue but restructuring the narrative from the ground up.
You never let me have any fun.
No fun? You have all the fun in the world. We have fun together, don't we? Whenever you want something, I buy it for you automatically. I take you to concerts, to museums, to movies. I do all the housework. Who does the tidying up? I do. Who does the cooking? I do. You and I, we have lots of fun. Don't we, Lolita?
MGM funded the film with a budget of $2 million, and filming took place over 88 days at Elstree Studios in England. The production was smooth by Kubrick's standards. He shot in black and white, which gave the film a documentary-like realism and also helped it feel less lurid. When the film hit theaters, it grossed over $9 million worldwide, a remarkable financial success for its time and subject matter. The controversy around the source material generated curiosity, and Kubrick's name was now associated with Spartacus, which gave the film a profile it might not otherwise have had. Even bans in countries like Ireland and New Zealand, which limited its initial reach, only fueled curiosity and demand later on. Lolita proved that Stanley could make a commercially successful film on his own terms, without studio interference. But he also realized that he had pushed the boundaries of taste as far as they could go in 1962. To go further, he would need to change the game entirely. Dr. Strangelove follows 3 parallel storylines unfolding simultaneously. The first is inside the Burpelson Air Force Base, where a deranged general named Jack Ripper has gone rogue and launched a nuclear strike on the Soviet Union. The second is inside the cockpit of one of the B-52 bombers heading toward its target, led by a gung-ho Texas cowboy of a pilot. And lastly, inside the Pentagon War Room, where the president, his generals, and the Soviet ambassador scramble to recall the planes or prevent global catastrophe. All 3 storylines converge in a finale of such magnificent, hideous absurdity that it remains one of the most iconic endings in cinema history. Kubrick had become genuinely preoccupied with nuclear war in the late 1950s, to the point where he seriously considered moving his family to Australia out of fear that New York City would be a Soviet target. He researched nuclear strategy obsessively, reading dozens of books and interviewing experts, but the more he learned, the more ridiculous the reality seemed. So he pivoted to satire.
Have you ever heard of a thing called fluoridation? Fluoridation of water?
Yes, I have heard of that, Jack, yes. Yes.
Well, do you know what it is?
No, I don't know what it is now.
Do you realize that fluoridation is the most monstrously conceived and dangerous communist plot we have ever had to face?
The entire film was made for $1.8 million, a remarkably lean budget for a production of this ambition. For that money, Kubrick built the War Room set from scratch, hired Peter Sellers for 3 separate roles, and shot the film across 9 months from February through November. At the box office, Strangelove earned an impressive $9.6 million, which was more than 5 times the budget, an extremely profitable return. Kubrick had produced it through his own company and negotiated a significant percentage of the profits. He made more money from Dr. Strangelove than any of his previous films combined, and, with a 98% critic score, this was the film that fundamentally changed Kubrick's position in Hollywood. It's routinely listed as one of the greatest political comedy films ever made. Virtually every dark comedy about government incompetence starts in the world Kubrick created here. That revered reputation gave Kubrick the leverage to pursue his most ambitious project yet. It would be the most expensive film of his career, the most controversial, and the one that would define his legacy forever. After the razor-sharp satire of Dr. Strangelove, Kubrick disappeared for 4 years. He never did any public interviews or press about his films anyway. He vanished into a world of research and obsession, but when he re-emerged, he brought with him one of the most ambitious filmmaking gambles ever attempted. The story unfolds in 4 movements. The first was millions of years ago. A tribe of starving ape men encountered a mysterious black monolith that teaches them to use bones as weapons. The second movement is the near future. Dr. Haywood Floyd travels to a lunar base where another monolith has been discovered, buried for 4 million years. Third, a mission to Jupiter. A spaceship carries 2 astronauts, Dr. David Bowman and Dr. Frank Poole, and a crew of 3 in hibernation. The movie's final act follows astronaut Dave Bowman into a journey through light, time, and consciousness, ending with an image that no audience in 1968, and arguably no audience ever since, has ever fully agreed on how to interpret. Kubrick wanted a film about humanity's place in the universe, the relationship between man and the machine, and ultimately, the idea that humanity may not be in control of its own destiny.
What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
What are you talking about, Hal?
This mission is too important for me to allow you to jeopardize it.
I don't know what you're talking about, Hal.
I know that you and Frank were planning to disconnect me, and I'm afraid that's something I cannot allow to happen.
Stanley insisted on absolute scientific accuracy. The budget started at $6 million, then ballooned to $10.5 million, which is equivalent to nearly $90 million today. Roughly half the total budget was invested in special effects, which Kubrick developed through methods that had no precedent. His team invented entirely new optical and photographic techniques from scratch. Every special effects was printed directly onto the original camera, with no copies, because Kubrick refused to accept any degradation in image quality. At the box office, the film grossed $146 million worldwide, a major monumental success, especially for a film this unconventional. It became the second highest grossing film of that year, and adjusted for inflation, it would have made more than $1 billion today, a truly remarkable financial return. This was interstellar way before its time, creating the conditions under which serious science fiction filmmaking became possible.
Well, I first saw 2001 as a child. I was about 7 years old, and they re-released 2001 in the wake of the tremendous success of Star Wars. So the appetite for anything to do with science fiction then was massive. And my father took me to the Leicester Square Theatre. And it became this sort of seminal introduction to the power of cinema, what cinema can be.
Space Odyssey currently holds a 90% critic score, as the movie grew into one of the most profitable and influential science fiction films ever made. After this film, Kubrick had complete and absolute creative freedom. No studio could say no to him. He chose to use that freedom in the most controversial way imaginable, and it would become one of the most celebrated and divisive films of the decade.
Well, I suppose you better let him in.
Wait a minute, will you? I'm sorry, but we don't usually let strangers in at the minute.
After the scale and ambition of 2001, Stanley Kubrick went in the complete opposite direction. The idea for A Clockwork Orange had actually been sitting with him for years. He read the book back in the early 1960s, but at the time, he passed on it. The material was extremely controversial and difficult to translate to screen in a way that wouldn't immediately alienate audiences. But after the success of Space Odyssey, Kubrick had complete leverage. He no longer needed to convince studios. He could choose what he wanted to make, And instead of another large-scale production, he deliberately chose something smaller, faster, and more contained. So he returned to Clockwork Orange. The movie follows Alex, a charismatic but violent teenager who spends his nights committing brutal crimes with his gang until he's arrested and imprisoned. While in custody, he volunteers for an experimental treatment designed to eliminate his violent impulses, conditioning him to feel physically ill at the thought of aggression. When he's released, Alex is no longer capable of violence, but he's also unable to defend himself, forcing him to navigate a world that now turns on him. The movie was made on a budget of $2 million, making it not only one of Kubrick's cheapest films, but also one of his fastest. The entire shoot was wrapped in less than a year, an almost unheard of pace for a director who typically spent multiple years on a single production. Kubrick shot almost entirely on location in London, which kept the costs down, while giving the film an authentic texture that studio sets could never have replicated. When the movie hit theaters, it became an immediate commercial success, grossing $114 million worldwide, a return of more than 50 times its cost. This was one of the most profitable films of its time, and also one of the most profitable movies Kubrick ever made. An unprecedented commercial success, unlike anything cinema had ever seen. Like many of Kubrick's films at the time, A Clockwork Orange was banned in several countries, including Brazil, Spain, South Korea, and Ireland. But the most dramatic response came from Great Britain. After a series of violent crimes that the press linked to the film, Warner Bros. Withdrew it from all British cinemas, so this movie was not shown legally in the UK for nearly 30 years, not until after Kubrick's death. Even with all that, none of this could stop the financial success of this masterpiece. And with an 86% critic rating and a 93% audience score, Kubrick made a decisive stylistic turn that was the complete opposite of what he'd just done. Barry Lyndon follows Redmond Barry, a young Irish drifter who climbs the social ladder through charm and opportunism, only for it all to slowly fall apart. Barry Lyndon runs for over 3 hours, telling a story that spans numerous decades and shows how a man reinvents himself in an attempt to climb the social ladder in England during the late 1700s. This is one of Kubrick's most visually stunning films, with every shot looking like it could literally be framed on a wall, easily one of his most beautiful cinematography. He shot every interior scene with natural light or candlelight, with no electric light on camera. Kubrick had spent years trying to make a film about Napoleon, a project he considered the most important of his career. He wrote a detailed script and was on the verge of beginning production when financial backing collapsed after the box office failure of Waterloo made other studios extremely reluctant to finance anything in that territory. The Napoleon project was shelved for good. He pivoted to William Thackeray's novel, The Luck of Barry Lyndon, which was set in the same 18th century world and allowed him to use much of the research he'd already conducted. Warner Bros. Backed the film with a budget of $11 million and complete creative control. To achieve the candlelight photography, Kubrick and Alcott obtained a set of Zeiss lenses originally developed for NASA moon photography, which allowed them to shoot in extraordinarily low light. The result was unlike anything that had ever appeared on screen. Kubrick spent 3 years in production, filming across England and Ireland with meticulous attention to period accuracy. At the box office, Barry Lyndon earned approximately $31 million worldwide, a fairly decent return but very far from the commercial reach that the studio was expecting. Greedy old Warner Bros. Was expecting something closer to what A Clockwork Orange made, but it was still modestly profitable. Critically, the movie holds a 78% critic score. It's now widely considered one of the most visually accomplished films ever made, and the NASA lens technique has been studied in film schools worldwide. Barry Lyndon's commercial performance left Kubrick in a position where he needed to deliver something more broadly appealing, so he poured everything into a film that would redefine horror movies forever and be studied for generations.
Here's Johnny.
Jack Torrance, a recovering alcoholic and struggling writer, takes a job as caretaker of the massive, isolated Overlook Hotel in the Colorado Rockies, bringing his wife Wendy and their strange son Danny. Young Danny has a rather strange ability called the Shining, a form of psychic perception that lets him see the past and future and communicate telepathically. As the harsh winter cuts them off from the outside world, the hotel begins to reveal something darker, something that slowly consumes Jack, pushing him toward madness while his son's psychic abilities make him uniquely aware of the danger. This was Kubrick at his most terrifying. The novel had been sent to Kubrick by Warner Bros. Executive John Calley. Kubrick later said it was the only thing ever sent to him by a studio that he found genuinely gripping. He agreed to adapt it and brought in Diane Johnson as co-writer, deciding that King's original story had several weak structural points that needed addressing. The production budget was set at $19 million, a step up from Barry Lyndon, and a meaningful financial commitment from Warner Bros. For a prestige horror film. The production lasted almost a full year. Kubrick's visual strategy was centered around the Steadicam, which at the time was a newly developed technology that allowed smooth fluid tracking shots at ground level. He pushed for countless takes, often exhausting his actors to get exactly what he wanted. Shelley Duvall, in particular, was pushed to extremes during filming, with Kubrick demanding emotional intensity that translated directly onto the screen.
There's no desperation. Oh, come on. What do you mean roll
2
video?
seconds.
We're killing ourselves out here, and you're going to be ready.
I am too. I'm standing
So we
right
play
by
mood
the
music?
door.
And I still think you shouldn't jump on every single emphatic line. It looks fake. It really does. It looks like you,
When I'm that nervous, it's a lot.
Shelley, I'm telling you, it's too many times.
Pulled all my hair. I pulled hunks of hair out on the windowsill. And the back got caught.
These are trim. Hunks of hair.
Oh, look.
Okay.
It just comes out.
An approach that has widely been criticized by YouTube pundits and Twitter analysts for decades, yet it undoubtedly made the film legendary and gave it staying power long after the theatrical run. At the box office, The Shining grossed over $47 million worldwide, a decent financial return but far from an initial global blockbuster. At the time of release, this movie was not as appreciated as it is today. The film received 2 Razzie nominations, including Worst Director for Stanley Kubrick. But over the years, the critical consensus flipped. It became one of the most recognized horror films in history. Every rewatch revealed something new, generating millions of dollars in total revenue from streaming. It became a global financial success in the long run, and one of the most financially valuable films Kubrick ever made. What began as a divisive release slowly transformed into one of cinema's most analyzed works. A film dissected frame by frame in documentaries, books, and endless fan theories, each trying to decode its shifting meanings. The movie was formally preserved in the U.S. National Film Registry by the Library of Congress, cementing its status as culturally and aesthetically significant. Kubrick had achieved something rare, even if recognition arrived slowly. But Kubrick wouldn't return immediately. 7 years would pass before his next feature, and when he finally re-emerged, the subject matter would shift dramatically. 7 years after The Shining, Stanley Kubrick returned with a very different kind of masterpiece. The movie is split in 2 distinct halves, like 2 separate films stitched together by theme rather than plot. The first half takes place in a brutal Marine Corps training camp, where recruits are trained under the infamous gunnery Sergeant Hartman. The transformation of Private Pyle becomes the emotional core of the movie, showing how institutional pressure can reshape and ultimately break a person. The second half of the film takes place in Vietnam, where the consequences of that conditioning are finally unleashed. The war zone is not portrayed as heroic or strategic, but fragmented, chaotic, and oddly detached, a place where trained instincts replace moral clarity. Kubrick based the film on Gustav Hasford's semi-autobiographical novel The Short-Timers. The production budget was set at $16.5 million, which was very modest for a war film of this ambition, particularly one that would ultimately deliver the visual scale it did. Kubrick had been living in England for 25 years, and, due to a severe fear of flying, was not going to travel to Southeast Asia or anywhere else. The Vietnam War would be recreated in England. Kubrick had palm trees imported from Spain. He dressed the ruins with Vietnamese advertising and signage.
Was it you, you scroungy little fuck, huh? Sir, no, sir. You little piece of shit, you look like a fucking worm. I bet it was you. Sir, no, sir.
Sir, I said it, sir.
Well, no shit. What have we got here? A fucking comedian, private joker. I admire your honesty. Hell, I like you. You can come over to my house and fuck my sister.
Full Metal Jacket went on to gross over $120 million worldwide, more than 7 times the production budget, an exceptional financial performance by any standard. Kubrick had negotiated a lucrative deal after the long hiatus. The first half of this film, in the boot camp scene, is easily one of my favorite Kubrick sequences, and one I would recommend to anyone who wants to understand his genius, but too much of a sissy to watch a black and white film, or not so interested in Kubrick's war or period drama. This is high-level comedy and tragedy smashed together in a way no other director could balance. Full Metal Jacket currently holds a 90% approval score and a 94% audience score, and would also be the last film Kubrick released in his lifetime. 12 long years passed before he returned to production, and when he finally did, it was for a dark, erotic concept set over a single Christmas weekend in New York City.
Now, get undressed.
Get undressed?
Remove your clothes.
Eyes Wide Shut follows Dr. Bill Harford, a wealthy Manhattan physician, over the course of 2 nights after his wife Alice reveals that she once fantasized about abandoning everything for a naval officer she briefly encountered. Bill, destabilized and obsessed, wanders into the night and eventually finds his way to a secret ritualistic masked orgy in a Long Island mansion. He is discovered and unmasked before the assembled gathering, and warned to leave and never speak of what he saw. The film follows his attempts to understand what he witnessed, and whether the events of those 2 nights were as real and dangerous as they seemed, or something else entirely. This is up there with one of Kubrick's most intimate and most mysterious films. The movie is based on Arthur Schnitzler's novella Dream Story. Kubrick had been interested in adapting it since the 60s, setting it aside repeatedly for other projects. In the 90s, he returned to it with a new concept. Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, who were at the absolute peak of their fame and their real-life marriage, would play the Harfords. The dynamic between their on-screen relationship and their real one would add a dimension no amount of acting could replicate. Warner Bros. Backed the film with a budget of $65 million, which was the most a studio had ever committed to a Kubrick production. They were getting 2 of the biggest stars in the world, the greatest living director at the height of his powers, and no idea whatsoever what the film was actually going to be. The shoot was famously grueling. Over 400 days, one of the longest continuous film productions in history. On the 7th of March of that same year, Kubrick showed his final cut to Tom Cruise, Nicole, and Warner Bros. Executives, and they all reportedly loved it. Unfortunately, only 6 days later, Kubrick died in his sleep, and he never saw the film released. Obviously, some believe Kubrick was exposing something real and dangerous, pointing to the film's unsettling tone and its depiction of hidden power structures as more than just fiction. Some also argued that the studio altered or softened the film after his death, suggesting that what audiences saw wasn't entirely Kubrick's untouched vision. Regardless, the timing and conversation around his death would spark years of speculation. Eyes Wide Shut was released 4 months after Kubrick's death, grossing over $162 million worldwide, making it the highest-grossing film of his career, but in terms of profitability, it was far from what the studio was expecting. The controversial subject matter limited the reach and viability of the movie during that period. Eyes Wide Shut currently holds a 77% critics score, which is ironically the lowest in Stanley Kubrick's catalogue after Fear and Desire. And yet, even his lowest-rated film has fueled years of analysis, debate, and obsession that would most likely never fade away. In many ways, Stanley was way ahead of his time, in ways the world is still catching up to.
Kubrick wouldn't let it stay this way. He would have changed that angle. He would have worked it out. He would have tried to figure out getting more time to shoot the scene this way or that way. He would have really seen it to its end. Yeah. And for that inspiration, I must say, it's looking at his films. And there's many ways I look at his films, besides on a big screen. I like watching my
Stanley would give me advice. He'd collaborate with me. I'd tell him a story I was interested in directing as a movie, and he'd ask me all the tough questions. What do you find interesting about that story? Why do you want to make that picture? Gee, that sounds kind of boring to me. How can you make that interesting? I mean, he was challenging me constantly.
Thanks for following me on this journey of one of the greatest filmmakers to ever touch God's green earth. If you enjoyed this breakdown, please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks for watching.